It's a huge privilege to be here on this stage again and to be talking to you. I guess you're here because you care about the climate and you care about action happening on the climate. And as you'll see from the leaflet, if you haven't got one, there's probably one on a bench in front of you. Community energy is a hugely beneficial and powerful way of doing local climate action. And so I want to today explain what it is, for those that don't know, inspire you a bit with how powerful it can be, and if possible connect you with a local existing community energy organisation that you might want to get involved with, or if there isn't one, maybe give you the inspiration to set one up. So I'll start. Get hold of a leaflet before you leave, certainly, because it's got links to how you can find out what your local, wherever you are, what your local organisation is. So I've been sort of introduced, but I'll tell you a little bit of my story, and then I'll give you some examples of what community energy is and a bit of the history of the movement, and then move on to the future. So I was a co-founder of Transition Town Brixton in about 2007, and we did lots of amazing visionary stuff, thinking about what the future could be like. We did a lot of work on food, we did a lot of work on remaking, and then in about 2010, we decided, right, we have to come back to energy because we have to come back to carbon, and that's where an awful lot of carbon emissions originate. So we set up Brixton Energy with the vision of putting renewable energy on rooftops in Brixton. And we looked at a load of rooftops, and eventually we discovered that there were a lot of social housing rooftops that were being refurbished at the time, and that would be a huge opportunity, but also a way of connecting energy deprivation with energy generation. That was the vision. It's kind of not quite as easy as that, as you can probably imagine. And as a result of that, we put 3 large solar arrays on top of social housing in Brixton and set up a kind of umbrella organisation called Repowering London, which is still going strong and inspiring lots of new community action. I'll describe a bit more of that later on. I then went off and did other campaigning work and had kids, and then about 4 years ago, a job came up with Community Energy England, which is like the trade body for the community energy organisations, like the connecting tissue, but also the voice. And I do the policy and advocacy, so I'm out there headbutting the government to try and get them to understand that we can't do net zero without people, and community energy is their essential embedded grassroots allies that will make it happen in the local area and connect everybody as essential active participants in the energy transition, without which it simply will not happen. The government smiles and nods and says nice things and talks about local community and empowering local leaders, but they tend to not get it. So the 10-point plan is all about big check, non-solutions in many cases, CCS and nuclear and so on. But it's all about getting the business people to do it in a very centralised way. The irony of that is that the transition in the energy system is going in the opposite direction. It is going local. And the savvy people in government know that, but of course they are not in the Cabinet Office or in number 10. And that is, to briefly describe it, it's the energy system moving from something that looks like a tree with the sap coming up and ending up at the leaves, at the consumers, to something that looks much more like a spider's web, where the energy is coming from all the different parts of the web and going, ideally, locally, to consumers on the network. And that's the way, and that has huge benefits in that it's much more resilient. You chop down a tree and all the leaves die. You know, if there's a crisis in a centralized system, you get a crash. Whereas in a diversified network, you can find other ways to take the energy. Before I go much further, I want to do a quick survey. Is anybody in the room involved in community energy? Yes. 1, 2. That's a pretty good ratio. That's probably higher than in the average in the wider population. And just a survey of roughly whereabouts in the country you are. So if I read out a few corners, could you stick your hands up if you're from them? So the northeast, Northwest, Midlands, was that Northwest? Midlands, fab. Southwest, fab. Southwest, Southeast, Wales. Good consider. It's great stuff going on in Wales. And London. Okay, I didn't mention London. I kind of put that under Southeast, but I'm from London. London. So we've got about 5 people from London. Great. East Anglia. Oh, yeah, you're right. East Anglia. Well, there's nothing going on in East Anglia. So you can help us change that. Okay. Oh, God, yeah. Scotland. Yes, I'm really sorry. Scotland. There's great stuff. And the Netherlands. Right, okay. Ireland. Okay, there's great stuff going on in Scotland. I'll mention that at a later date. So, okay, for those of you who aren't connected up with community energy already, what is community energy? Basically, obviously, it's people in their local community getting together to organise climate action focusing on energy. And that can be all sorts. It can be wind, solar, hydro, storage, heat projects, energy efficiency projects. A lot of community energy came out of energy efficiency work that people were doing in their sustainability organisations in communities before the feed-in tariff came along and made this sort of project possible. And increasingly more diverse and connected up, multiple typologies of energy. So people connecting up transport with a generation source, heat with wind, whose cheap power makes a heat project viable. I'll talk more about that later. So before I go into examples of what community energy is around, I'll give a quick history because I kind of started with it there. People doing energy since the 1970s. When people ask me how I'm involved in this, I say I was drug up in the 1970s, which is like the academy for the future that is coming towards us, the first energy crisis. And energy efficiency, ministers say this all the time, the cheapest energy is the energy you don't need to use, negawatts. But the problem is you can't take a skim, you can't take a margin off negawatts, you can't take a profit off negawatts. It's possible but difficult. So everything that government policy tends to do is about generation and about consumption and about supply. A lot of community energy comes with the energy hierarchy built into it, which is reduce the energy demand to what we need to live well, and then work out how the hell we supply that renewably, zero carbon and locally. But along in the early noughties, mid-noughties, came the feed-in tariff, which was an opportunity to get a subsidy from the government for every kilowatt you generated, whether you used it or not, which was amazing. It was a badly designed scheme in lots of ways. It was a tax on everybody who uses energy, in many cases, to enable middle-class people to put solar on their roofs. Guilty. But it also enabled community energy to do stuff like this. It was an opportunity for us to put renewable energy in local locations and to take a profit and reuse it for local benefit. So community energy organisations are all non-profit and they all dedicate their surplus resources over what it costs to maintain the asset and to maintain the finance. It's all dedicated to benefiting the local community. And the motivations for people involved in community energy are 1, climate change, 2, local and social benefit. And that's a world I want to be part of. And it's full of just amazing genius solutionists getting out there, working out what the intensely locally appropriate solution is, what the combinations of things that present an opportunity to generate power locally or do energy solutions locally that will also bring local benefit. So the feed-in tariff made a huge difference, and community energy went from 0 to 60 in a very short amount of time. So between 2014 and 2017, the sector was doubling in size every year, which is and it would have carried on. But then the government got a bit panicked, and the fossil fuel sector realised that there was too much of a good thing going on, and they decided to cut it back, and they reduced it by half just before Brixton Energy was about to install its solar panels on the social housing. Many of the community energy organisations we knew about who were planning projects at that point said, we can't make the spreadsheet work. Just pack up and go home. We bloody-mindedly said we're going to do it anyway, not to prove the government right that it was over-subsidised, but to just do it. And the feed-in tariff was getting cut round about here, but community energy carried on managing to make a business case to do it and raising millions to do huge amounts of local generation. But the belt was tightened further and the pips squeaked, and gradually, as you can see, activity stalled, dwindled off. Until last year, we had our most challenging year ever, and in the UK, only 2.4% of increased renewable community energy capacity was installed. And that's a crying waste of these amazing entrepreneurs. Something like 80 projects stalled, and they were mostly stalled because of not being able to get the initial finance to prove that this was a going concern. So it was the early stage finance or the investor certainty that the feed-in tariff gave that meant it was a problem. The coalition government, Ed Davey specifically, Lib Dem, energy minister, put in place, he really got it, and he put in place a community energy strategy, which was predicted that community energy, with the level of government support that it currently enjoyed, could be powering 1 million homes by 2020. 2020 came, and we'd managed to do 10% of that through no fault of community energy, just because we've been cut off at the knees so many times. But community energy is indefatigable and entrepreneurial, and what they do is get out there and make whatever they can happen, start to duck and dive and combine things. So community energy organisations are moving into transport. 30% increase in transport activity in 2021. A huge increase in energy efficiency, which you can still get some grants for, but also being paid for out of the profits from earlier installations in the case of the established organisations. And we continue to increase our work on energy efficiency because the local need is so huge. Sorry, I have to refer to my slightly chaotic mind map. As a result of the community energy strategy, the government put in place an urban community energy fund and a rural community energy fund. They panicked about the urban community energy fund and they cut it with 8 million still unspent. The rural community energy fund was doing great stuff, enabling rural communities to do feasibility and development work to create projects through to March 2022, when the government let it end without any replacement. And that further hampered the ability of communities to get to realise local opportunities. Really annoying. But I mentioned that we only did 2.4% of increased generation capacity, but because we're diversifying, no longer can we measure the activity in community energy in terms of installed capacity, because we're doing so many other things. In that year where we did 2.4% increase in generation capacity, employment in the sector grew by 40%. So, and it's the people on the ground that deliver the benefit. So community energy is still finding a way of delivering that benefit. In 2020, we came up with a 2030 vision, and that was to grow by 12 to 20 times. Now, that remains out of reach at the moment, at a 2% annual increase, despite 40% extra employment. And that would deliver huge amounts of extra local economic activity, carbon saving. But we've been headbutting the Labour Party through the brilliant Co-op Party for the last year. And you might have noticed that about 6 weeks ago, they came out with their energy plan. And in it was the local power plan. And blow me down, there's 400 million a year in low interest loans for communities to do energy projects, alongside 600 million a year for local authorities, in funding for local authorities. So the possibility of us achieving that 2030 vision is suddenly, if something happens at an election in the next 18 months, to realise that vision and to hugely upscale this essential local activity. So if you want to get involved in community energy, if Labour gets in, it's going to be an absolute hotbed. It's going to be all those possibilities that they've been storing in bottom drawers are going to be coming out and are going to be being made to happen. It's a hugely exciting possibility. And there are amazing projects scaling up activity and increasing the connect up between community energy and local authorities, which is often a very difficult relationship. I speak from heartfelt experience here. It only takes one officer to be a total blocker, but equally, when it works, it can be absolutely amazing. And the best local climate action is where communities and the local authority have got it and are really working well together. And there's a project run by Community Energy South called the Pathways Project. Lara's local organisation in Norfolk, is just become part of the Pathways Project. And that is getting local authorities to build community energy into their climate emergency plans and to understand the importance of supporting those communities to get active, very often starting with the powering down, with the energy saving side of the work. And then as they get a basis and as they get more traction in the community, moving to get community investment for the powering up, the generation projects. And we hope we can spread that nationwide. There are about 5 county councils that are on it at the moment. And certainly when Labour gets in, it'll turbocharge it. So coming back to community energy. So that is huge hope for me. I've been struggling 4 years to try and get policy to support these amazing solutionists on the ground, and there's hope. There's hope. So why is community energy important? Well, I've already mentioned that without people being involved, we don't actually stand a chance, because we can put in place all the systems, but as some wise person said, citizens have a veto on net zero. They only have to say, no, I don't want a heat pump. Can't be bothered to shift the stuff in my loft. I'm not going to insulate. And you just don't get there. Getting people to be engaged and involved in the system doesn't come from a government advertising campaign. It comes from peer pressure. It comes from a change in the norm, and that really has to be local. It has to be trusted intermediaries, those people trust, neighbours, community activists, and it has to ideally be something that is visible. So once somebody's put a solar panel on a roof in a street, it becomes so much more possible for those neighbours to go and talk to that person and say, was it difficult? Is it possible? How do I do it? What's in it for me? And suddenly they start sprouting. So the Committee on Climate Change has explicitly said many times to the government that it will not be possible to get close to meeting a net zero target without engaging with the people. And yet the government carries on with the supply side non-solutions. Partly because 2/3 of the interventions that are necessary for net zero rely on behaviour change and decisions. People to make decisions, and those decisions happen locally. Very often they're about local activity, like transport. If you were in the earlier workshop, 40% of journeys are less than 2 miles. Well, if suddenly there is people talking about the carbon impact of not getting on your bike, you can get people to build the cycleways that make it doable, and then you can get the changes. So community energy is a really important gathering of foot soldiers for the energy transformation. I think that's all I need to say about that. I want to come on to some of the inspiring stuff that's actually happening so that you get a flavour and a taste. And I'll start in Bristol, partly because I guess a number of you drove over the amazing Severn Bridge on your way in. And if you look left, you can see Avonmouth. And there are a number of turbines there. And I guess you probably know also about the problems of doing onshore wind in England at the moment. The government's basically banned it since 2015. Well, the biggest turbine among that little cluster of turbines there, it's 150 metres to the tip, is the one turbine that's been built this year, and it's been built by community energy. It's taken 9 years, but it's owned by the community, and all the benefit from that turbine goes to the community of Lawrence Weston, one of the most impoverished and deprived communities in Bristol. And it powers the equivalent of 3,500 homes, and it's completely rocking. It's a hugely inspiring project. And I do actually, I do have a picture of it, so I will share that with you. There it is. Towering, impressive, amazing thing. But that the only people in the country to be able to do onshore wind this year is a community, is testament to the absolute dogged determination of these people. They are awe-inspiring. But other stuff that's happening in Bristol, there's a Bristol Energy Cooperative who've just done a 1 megawatt rooftop installation on a new film studios in the outskirts of Bristol, community funded. They're going to be doing 1.5 or 2 megawatts next year. We're going to a conference with them in the autumn with the UK Warehousing Association. So we hope the millions of square feet of community of warehouse rooftops will see the benefit of connecting with their local community to pay for the stuff to happen. Because very often a warehouse will go, well, we don't use much electricity, so we'll put a handkerchief up there. No, you've got 1 million square feet, put 1 million square feet of solar up there, and then the community will work out the solutions to use the stuff and bring benefit to the local community. Also in Bristol, there's been sustainability activity going on in Bristol for years, and it was the European Green Capital in 2015. But there was a wonderful project called Bristol Green Doors, which was like a sort of open house for environmental homes. So people who'd done the retrofit on their homes open their doors and welcome people in to explain how difficult or easy or beneficial it was. And out of that came another glorious project called the Cheese Project, which you wouldn't think was an energy project. You can make energy from cheese. It's a sort of strange corner of biomass where they turn the whey into something. They ferment the whey. They do anaerobic digestion. But that's not what it's about. It's the community heat expert energy survey. I've got it wrong. But it's about doing surveys of people's homes. And what they do is they fit a big fan in the front door and they suck the air out of the house. So every gap is a draft in. And they have to do this during the winter when it's colder outside. And then they walk around with a tablet with an infrared camera on, and they just get a picture, talking all the while, of where all the stuff is coming in, where all the leaks are, basically. And then they can retrofit those leaks strategically. And they reckon that £100 worth of draft busting materials, I love that phrase, it was invented by a colleague of mine in Brixton, draft busting, like ghost busting, but for drafts, strategically applied by volunteers, so there's no labour cost in that, but £100 of materials can save up to 30% on an energy bill, which could be several £100s in the first year. So that level of energy retrofit project is hugely beneficial to the householder. The return on investment is amazing, and nobody else is really doing it. The government has never seen the opportunity of that. They've never put in place policy or support to make that low-tech energy retrofit a viable business model. So stupid when you look at the returns on investment. So that's just some of the stuff that's happening in Bristol. I'll talk a little bit about what's happening in Brixton, change a couple of letters and move a couple of 100 miles. So where I started Brixton Energy, I've explained, turned into Repowering London. Repowering London then went out and said, right, we've learnt the difficulty, the challenges of doing this. We want to spread the love and the knowledge and help other communities do it. So Hackney, Vauxhall, North Kensington Community Energy, Aldgate have all benefited from the input and the support of Repowering, which is now employing something like 17 or 19 people from our humble meetings of volunteers every Monday morning, every Monday afternoon over 3 years. It's also doing Lambeth Community Solar, which is putting solar on schools, on doctors' surgeries, and it's got a number of innovative local supply projects where it's connecting up the solar on the roof with the residents underneath, which is really difficult to do because in the UK we have no right to supply energy locally, to sell the energy we generate locally. We can only sell it to a big supplier who then supplies it back at 3, 4, 5 times the price to the consumer. In Brixton, taking the advantage of a little loophole in the regulation, which an organisation called Energy Local has kind of institutionalised, worth looking them up, although it's... anyway, it enables a local generation to supply local usage through the main energy grid on a substation level. And you net it off, you kind of calculate it. We generated X amount, these people used Y amount, and they pay whatever the agreed price is. So in Brixton, local social housing residents underneath the solar panels we installed in 2013 are paying 6.3 pence a kilowatt. What are we paying? 34? No, that's a social benefit that I think we need a bit more of, isn't it? Other community benefits. Community energy, because of the trusted intermediary thing I was talking about earlier, are something like 4 to 5 times better at engaging with local people about energy efficiency than the energy suppliers or even local government. And they deliver 12 to 13 times the local benefit than any commercial project, even a more locally based community commercial project, because they keep the money spinning locally, they use local supply chains, local investors get a return on their money, it empowers other local projects like energy efficiency projects on the back of the profits, and so on. In Scotland, community wind, there's a report that shows community wind returns 34 times more financial benefit to communities than commercial wind, which in Scotland is kind of mandated to supply, I think it's £5,000 per megawatt installed to the local community. That's 170,000 per megawatt installed as against 5,000. Thank you. Is that a half time for questions? Yeah. You've got plenty of time. Okay. I feel like cool. There'll be questions. Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for the heads up. Yeah, that covers off that, really. Just to cover a few other areas of activity, I've mentioned our work in the energy crisis. Community Energy England got funding to train some more energy advisors, and community energy advice is so much more powerful than what the government provides, which is mostly a central website or a telephone service. And even some of the big charities only do that, because if you know the housing that the person you're talking to, either face-to-face or on the phone, lives in, or the community conditions, you can be so much more practical about your advice. And the relationships are often long-term. There's a beautiful case study from Community Energy, South East London Community Energy, where they helped one woman who arrived at their energy cafe with £10 in the bank, a boiler that had just broken. She was going deaf, and over that time they helped her get benefits, they helped her get a replacement boiler, they helped her do insulation, they helped her get fire alarms, including a pillow that vibrated if the fire alarm went off. That was what you can get out of a long-term person-to-person relationship. What else? Yes, heat, as you probably know, is a hugely important area of energy, carbon emissions, far greater than the electricity we actually use. But we're electrifying our heat system. So pioneering the low carbon heat systems is really, really important. And lots of the most important innovation that's happening is happening with communities, because it what I call community test beds the new system. So in the northeast, there's an amazing project called the Zero Carbon Terrace Streets, where they're working out how to do the retrofit that's necessary, what kind of heat pump they will use, where they will put the boreholes, whether it will travel as hot water from a centralized thing or whether it'll travel as cool water and then be heated up in each house with a smaller unit, how they will pay for it. Can they do it by some kind of standing charge? Normally you do your retrofit and you do your heat project, and the idea is that the savings will pay for the project. But actually engineering that financial stuff is really, really complicated, and nobody's really doing it properly. Transport, as I mentioned, hugely more activity around transport. And one lovely person who was working in the northeast, in lots of rural communities, the transport's been cut to shreds. You can't get anywhere. People may have a car, they may want a second car, may need a second car, but they kind of want to go green. Somebody comes up with the idea of a car club. The village hall is full. Yes, we want a car club and an electric car club. And then they realise they can't connect to the grid because the grid is so shredded and sick at that end. So suddenly they become advocates for the hydro scheme that will power their... She talked about the community car club as the gateway drug to community energy, which I absolutely love. And it's this kind of connecting up of what the local opportunities and needs are that community energy does so brilliantly. The other areas of activity which I will just mention is around storage. If we're going to have that local web energy system that I've talked about, what we need to be doing is balancing, co-locating generation near demand. So at the moment there's almost no generation significantly in the southeast because the NIMBYs don't want it. But we need to be putting generation near population and areas of consumption, because the shortest distance the energy has to travel, the more efficient it is. That's why rooftop is so powerful, but it's not the only solution to do what we need to do at scale. But we also need to do that local balancing act. And we need to introduce... So the system has to be smart, and that's where smart meters can be really, really important, because you can work out the patterns of usage and you can balance... you can predict and you can enable people to switch off bits of kit that they don't need to have on at times when there's a bit of an local energy crisis. But you can also install storage, and then you, alongside the smart, you introduce the flexibility. So you can turn down demand when the sun isn't shining and the wind isn't blowing, and turn it up when there's excess demand. And community energy, it's hugely difficult, but community energy is again in the field, pioneering on that. So I think I'm gonna stop now and ask for questions. I also have my computer with me. which has which I will be able to get up, the Community Energy England national map, which if you go to communityenergyengland.org, on the front page is a link to the national map, and you can then find out what activity there is in your local area or wherever you are, and connect up with it and get involved with it, which I would hugely encourage you to do. But I hope I've managed to inspire you to join that band of stalwart, genius energy solutionists. If you get nothing out of it, you'll get the excitement and enjoyment of working with absolutely amazingly powerful and wonderful people. And I hope I'll be able to connect you with your local organisations. So I'm going to stop now and ask for any questions, because I've probably forgotten to talk about some pretty important stuff. Thank you.
Thank you, Duncan. Great, loads of hands going up. So let's start with this one at the front while we've got a short mic.
Thank you. That was really inspiring. Thank you. So my question is, I guess, where do you start? So in my area, I can think of a project I'd love to do. There's a Transition Town movement who've done community solar on schools. There's local councillors. There's the climate action team within the council. There's your MP. There's talking to the local residents group. Who do you approach first? There's solar power companies? I don't know how to begin.
Brilliant. Can I answer that one? I would say you've got a lot going for you in your local area. If you've got a Transition Town group that's already done solar on schools, there'll be people there who know the opportunities. So take them your opportunity, and they may say to you, "Oh, I can't do it yet, but when the Labour Party gets in, or when we get some more funding from this current government, yes, that's our next priority. We want to do this project." So go to them first. If they're not already dealing with their local climate team in the local authority, and you can broker that relationship, there's huge amounts to be gained with that. For anybody else, on the Community Energy England website, there are a series of how-to pages, which is accumulated knowledge over the last 10 years of how it works and links to resources. And there is a whole section on setting up community energy. And there are various actual pocket guides in that.
What was that resource again?
It's communityenergyengland.org, which is my national trade body, and there's a how-to section. I think it's probably in learning and knowledge or something like that. But there's a lot of resource and take you right the way through to doing the difficult stuff. But stick around afterwards and we'll have a little chat.
The QR code's on the leaflet, isn't it?
I don't think that's a QR code. It's a QR code that'll take you to Community Energy England. Where is it? .org. Okay, yes. Yeah, so take the leaflet. There's a way in through that, yeah.
Yeah. So a few years ago, there was a lot of talk about getting heat energy, especially from old coal mines and the tube, and that seems to have gone all quiet, and I'm just wondering if that is still a thing that people are looking into and if that could be a source of community energy.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. Yes. Basically, heat is really difficult, and if there is a source of waste heat anywhere in your locality, the odds are that, well, in a few cases, the big people, the energy companies know about the mine water, and they are involved in trying to do that in the northeast. But I think also one of the councils in Tyneside was also supporting that. And I think community energy is involved. Heat from the tube, again, is brilliant. If you're going to be doing heat pumps, the traditional one is a heat pump from the ground where you get the heat at 14 degrees on average, but there is a danger that it cools down as you use more and more of it. You get the heat from the air, that's the air source heat pump. Well, that's fine, but in the winter when you want heat, the air is at only 6 degrees. It still works, but if you've got waste heat coming from a factory or a tube or deep down, if there's a way that you can connect up that waste heat with your heat pump, you're taking something that's at 20 degrees, and it takes so much less energy to get it to 40 or 45 or 70 or whatever you need it at. It's a really important opportunity. If you know of waste heat in your local area, it would be great to gather people around. And you will find when you start gathering people come out of the woodwork. That retired heat engineer who's been wanting to do something but hasn't had a cohort will suddenly be at your meetings and be the absolute, gem that nobody was accessing. So does that answer the question at all? But yes, waste heat stuff is really, really important, and it's the kind of thing that is intensely local and that community energy should and is be bringing to the table.
Can you actually explain it? I can't be the only one. How does that work? Heat from the tube or heat from the crowd? I don't know. How would I get it in my home?
Okay, no, that's thank you for the tube somehow generates heat. It's bodies down there, it's machinery down there, and in the summer it's intolerable. But in the winter you go down the tube and it's never cold,
How do I get that heat?
Well, it's evacuated by the tube company up with great fans that throw it out. That often it's so hot that you can actually see the air shimmer. They're just wasting it because they need to get it out in order for people not to cook down below. And in mines, there's if you go 2 or 3 feet down here, the temperature will be a standard 14, 15 degrees, winter and summer. And you put a borehole down through that, you get that temperature water out. But if you can stick it down a mine shaft where the temperature is likely to be 25 degrees in the water year round, then you're getting that much more benefit. But you've got to pump it further. So you're looking for a factory that is using heat processes is probably throwing that heat away. And if you can say to them, we'll do a project that enables you to have all the hot water you need for your offices, which currently you're using a gas boiler for, and something to heat the housing estate next door, you've got a win-win-win, a double, treble bubble. Yep.
So I live in a council flat on an estate in Hackney, and the council haven't insulated the property, and it's awful. I mean, I once complained to the Labour Party because they dropped this leaflet through the door, and I said, my walls are dripping with condensation and mould and all sorts. And they came and insulated the inside of my flat, some of the walls on the inside, which meant that my flat got a tiny bit smaller.
Yeah.
And it's just not very nice. They had to move the electrics and stuff. But my neighbours are still in the same position. They've got mould growing in there. How do you get the council the cash-strapped council to come and insulate your house? Because there'd be no point in starting I mean, I know that there is an energy company, Stokey Energy. I don't know whether you've heard of it.
Brilliant.
Which is run by the people who live opposite us, who have a big house and solar panels on the roof and stuff. But I don't really know what they're doing about that. But how do you, it's square one. How do you get the council to come and insulate your home?
Square one, I would say, is go and talk to people in Stokey Energy and say, this is a big local problem, and can we talk to you about how we address it together? Well, they already have very good relations with the council. I have to say, flats, is yours exclusively council block or is it mixed tenure? No, it's mixed. See, that is the real problem. But it is a problem that community energy is beginning to address. Repowering London and South East London Community Energy have just got serious funding to look at how you do energy work in mixed tenure blocks. Because you sometimes see it in a row of council houses. Somebody's done some really thoroughgoing work, and there's a house in the middle where they haven't done it because that person's a freeholder or a leaseholder, and they couldn't afford it, so they missed out. You just think it's bonkers, but it's a really big problem for mixed tenure. But I would say that in many cases the solution is external insulation, because a lot of these, especially the big high-rise blocks, they're concrete framed, and the concrete of your floor pad extends out to the walkway or over somebody's balcony, and that's basically a fin that in the winter is the north wind is wicking the heat out of the building. Now, if you can keep that insulated from the north wind, that becomes a heat battery. So it keeps you cool in the summer, and it keeps you warmer in the winter because it's the thermal mass is hanging on to the heat. And external insulation is much less invasive than your internal insulation, but it's a really big project, and it needs, some way of organising around the mixed tenures because, and if need be, funding it to just happen, the whole thing. And then there's all the problem with external insulation, which we know, the Grenfell thing, people are just not doing it because they're scared.
And we've got time for just 2 last questions, and we can carry on chatting outside afterwards. It's a hot topic.
I'm just wondering about kind of the technical. So in all of these cases, when you're building community, say, putting solar all within the community, but you're always about paying it back. You're generating it to go back into the grid, then there's no way for people to actually assimilate it themselves within their area. At that point, does having batteries and storage, there's no way to make it actually hyperlocal and you can keep it yourself within your community. Yeah. Does that not encourage people doing it themselves? Because then you can go off grid, you keep it within your house, you store it, you're never touching the grid. Yeah. I'm just wondering where community energy can benefit when that hyperlocal individual one seems... I love this, but I'd love to generate our own in a community, have your own windmill, and it never leaves the grid. I just wonder.
That is possible through the energy local model that I've mentioned. It's already happening in Wales, in Bethesda, in Brixton, and
you do that in Wales?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I don't care about England.
Visit energylocal.org. It's at the moment it's not an easy replicable thing, but it's a principle, and they're trying to get the the derogation that they use. They're trying to get that built into regulation so that it can be done everywhere. But I gave a slightly wrong impression. Not all community energy feeds the grid. In fact, because you get such rubbish, you don't get an export tariff. You get paid for your electricity, but derogatory amounts from the suppliers. So what the viable model tends to be a community or school building that has a high daytime electricity use, and then it self-consumes. So the first call on the electricity from the school roof is cheaper electricity for the school, and the community energy owns the panels on their roof, and it sells the electricity at a significant discount to the school. Battery storage can really help with that, especially if there's a non-daytime peak usage. So a community hall that's going to be used a lot in the evening, yes, stick in a battery, and then you're using the electricity you generated during the day, during the evening, and you're continuing to get the savings. The individual stuff is quite difficult for communities to do. There is an organisation called Solar Together that is like a community buying club that has done quite successfully, and some community energy organisations use it. Have a look at that. But
And then last quick question to you, and then we'll see.
So first, just 5 minutes.
Okay, 5 minutes. So I shouldn't be giving you this question. So nice, neat answer, and then take it outside.
yep.
Great. So who's to blame, right? So you laid out the price of local energy versus buying from the grid, and those numbers are spectacular. You should use them as the lead. But can we engage in a politics of naming and shaming? Like, who's profiting from that and who's blocking the change?
The thing about the local energy model, localenergy.org model, is that they don't have to pay some of the the electricity is cheaper because it's come less far, but B, they don't have to pay some of the policy costs, and they don't have to pay for the transmission network, which is a significant part of your electricity bill. I mean, it's like 12% of your electricity bill is paying for the pylons and the which are important. But if you can do it locally, then you're avoiding needing to build more of that. But yes, I mean, energy supply is not a high profit industry. The margin of an EDF or something like that is 2%, which is not compared. The margin on the people who are actually doing the networks, the district network operators, is 5-6%. So there's more there. So there is rake off. But energy is especially at the moment, is a really tricky thing to engage in. So I'm not sure I want to point the fingers. I just want to work on the solutions, really.
Okay, and carry on the debate outside. Thank you very much. Give it up for Duncan Law, talking about community energy. And don't let this be the end of this conversation.